Deep within the ancient wisdom of yogic traditions lies a technique so profound, so transformative, that it has remained largely hidden from the masses. This method wasn't widely taught because its power transcends ordinary spiritual practices. It directly awakens the soul's memory of its true nature. Yogananda, in his most intimate circles, shared a practice that goes beyond the common teachings found in his published works. This technique was reserved for those who had demonstrated unwavering commitment to the spiritual path, those whose hearts were pure enough to handle its transformative power. Why was this technique kept from public knowledge? The answer lies in its potency. When properly practiced, it dissolves the very foundation of what we consider to be reality. The ego, our constructed identity built over years of conditioning, cannot withstand the truth this technique reveals. And society, built on the collective agreement of separate identities functioning within material boundaries, isn't structured to accommodate individuals who have awakened to their true nature. The technique itself operates on multiple dimensions simultaneously. It isn't merely a meditation practice, though meditation forms its foundation. It isn't simply a breathing technique, though the breath becomes the vehicle for consciousness expansion. It transcends even the concept of mantra repetition, though sacred vibration plays a crucial role. What makes this technique forbidden is not that it was prohibited, but rather that it was protected. The masters understood that premature exposure to such powerful spiritual technology could create imbalance in the unprepared seeker. The ego, when threatened but not fully transcended, can create even stronger delusions to protect itself, sometimes manifesting as spiritual pride, false enlightenment experiences, or psychological disturbances. The technique involves a specific pattern of breath control that alters the flow of prana, life force, through the subtle energy channels. This altered energy flow activates dormant areas of the brain associated with higher consciousness, while simultaneously opening the heart center to its fullest capacity. When breath, brain, and heart synchronize in this specific manner, something remarkable occurs. The veil between individual consciousness and cosmic consciousness temporarily dissolves. In this dissolved state, the soul recognizes itself not as the limited identity it had assumed, but as something far more expansive. The recognition isn't intellectual. It's a direct experience, a remembering of what has always been true beneath the layers of forgetting. Those who experienced this technique under Yogananda's guidance reported profound shifts in their perception of reality. Many described it as coming home, or remembering what I had always known but somehow forgotten. This wasn't merely an altered state, but a recognition of the most fundamental truth of existence, that consciousness itself is the ground of all being, and that our individual consciousness is not separate from the universal consciousness that permeates everything. The technique was kept guarded also because of its irreversibility. Once the soul truly remembers its nature, there is no complete return to the former state of ignorance. While the ego may reassert itself after the experience, a seed of knowing has been planted that continues to grow throughout one's lifetime, gradually transforming every aspect of the practitioner's being. In ancient texts, this state of remembrance was referred to as pratyabhijna, or recognition, the recognition of one's true nature that has always been present but obscured by the veil of Maya or illusion. This recognition isn't about gaining something new, but rather about removing the obstacles that prevent us from seeing what has always been there. The forbidden aspect of this technique also relates to its potential to liberate one from societal programming and conventional religious dogma. When the soul remembers its true identity, it naturally transcends artificial boundaries created by different belief systems. The technique doesn't align with any particular religion, but rather reveals the common truth that underlies all authentic spiritual traditions. As we explore this technique further in subsequent chapters, we must approach it with the reverence and respect it deserves. The journey of soul remembrance isn't a casual spiritual entertainment, but a sacred process that demands your complete presence, dedication, and willingness to release everything you believe yourself to be. Are you prepared to remember who you truly are? Are you willing to let go of the limited identity you've carried throughout this lifetime? The technique awaits those who answer these questions with a wholehearted yes, those ready to embark on the most profound journey possible, the journey back to your true self. The essence of this forbidden technique lies in its capacity to pierce through the accumulated layers of false identification. These layers, constructed from memories, conditioning, traumas, and societal programming, have obscured your true nature since birth. Through this profound practice, the soul doesn't acquire new knowledge, but rather remembers what it has always known at its deepest level. When the technique is properly executed, a remarkable shift in consciousness occurs. The boundaries that seem to separate your individual awareness from the vast ocean of universal consciousness begin to dissolve. This dissolution isn't theoretical or conceptual, it's experiential. You directly perceive that your essential nature is not confined to your physical form or personal history. What exactly does the soul remember during this awakening? First, it recognizes its fundamental nature as pure awareness, boundless, timeless, and unconditioned. This awareness isn't something you possess, it's what you are at your core. Second, the soul recalls its intimate connection with all existence. The perceived separation between self and other, observer and observed, reveals itself as an illusion maintained by limited perception. The experience has been described by practitioners as a profound homecoming. One student wrote, "It wasn't like discovering something new, but rather like remembering something I've always known, yet somehow forgotten. The amnesia that I had lived with my entire life suddenly lifted, and I recognized myself as that which has been present through all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. This recognition transcends intellectual understanding. Many spiritual seekers have conceptual knowledge about non-duality or cosmic consciousness, but this technique facilitates direct experience. The difference between reading about honey and tasting it. The taste of your true nature cannot be conveyed through words alone. It must be experienced directly. During this recollection process, many practitioners report accessing what appear to be memories from beyond this lifetime. These aren't necessarily literal past lives in a sequential sense, but rather glimpses of the soul's journey through various forms of embodiment. The significance lies not in the content of these memories, but in the recognition that your essence has never been confined to a single lifetime or identity. What makes this technique particularly powerful is its capacity to bypass the intellect's defensive mechanisms. The rational mind, designed to maintain our sense of separate selfhood, typically reinterprets profound spiritual experiences to preserve the ego's continuity. This technique, however, works at a level beneath conscious thought, activating direct knowing through the intelligence of the heart and the body's subtle energy systems. The recollection process often unfolds in stages. Initially, practitioners may experience brief moments of expanded awareness, windows through which they glimpse their vast nature. These glimpses, though temporary, plant seeds of transformation. With continued practice, these moments extend in duration and deepen in clarity until the recognition becomes more stable. One of the most significant aspects of this soul remembrance is the dissolution of fear, particularly the fear of death. When you directly experience your essence as that which was never born and never dies, the terror of physical demise naturally subsides. This doesn't create recklessness about physical existence, but rather a profound acceptance of life's impermanent nature. The technique also facilitates access to what might be called the Akashic dimension of consciousness, a field of information that contains all knowledge and experience. In this state, specific insights about one's purpose, relationships, and spiritual evolution become available. These insights aren't random, but precisely what the soul needs for its current stage of development. Many who experience this profound remembering report a simultaneous sense of both vastness and intimacy. The boundlessness of cosmic consciousness doesn't feel abstract or impersonal, but rather deeply intimate, the most familiar thing one could possibly experience. This paradoxical quality reflects the true nature of consciousness itself. It's important to understand that this technique doesn't create an altered state that eventually fades, returning you to normal consciousness. Instead, it removes the alterations that have distorted your perception of reality, allowing you to recognize what has always been your natural state beneath the mind's projections. The remembrance process also dissolves the artificial boundary between spiritual practice and everyday life. Those who have experienced this awakening no longer see meditation as something separate from living. The recognition of one's true nature continues whether sitting in formal practice or engaged in worldly activities. As the soul remembers its true identity, a natural compassion arises, not as a cultivated virtue, but as the spontaneous expression of recognized oneness. When you directly perceive that others are not separate from your own being, kindness flows without effort or deliberation. The pathway to soul remembrance requires specific practices that systematically dismantle the barriers between conscious awareness and your deeper nature. These techniques operate simultaneously on the physical body, the energy system, and consciousness itself. When practiced with proper intention and precision, they create the conditions for the profound awakening we've discussed. At the foundation of this forbidden technique lies a specific breath pattern that radically alters the flow of life force energy throughout your subtle body system. This isn't merely deep breathing or even pranayama as commonly taught. It involves synchronizing the breath with precise visualizations and subtle internal movements that activate dormant energy centers in the brain and spine. Begin by sitting in a comfortable position with your spine erect yet relaxed. Close your eyes and bring your awareness to the natural rhythm of your breath. Without forcing, allow your breath to deepen slightly, extending both the inhalation and exhalation. Once your breathing has stabilized, you'll implement the three-part breath pattern. First, inhale slowly through the nose, directing the breath energy up the spine from the base to the crown of the head. As you do this, visualize a luminous current of light ascending through the central channel of your being. This inhalation should last approximately 7 seconds. Second, retain the breath at the crown center for approximately 7 seconds. During this retention, visualize the luminous energy expanding outward from the crown in all directions, creating a sphere of radiant awareness that encompasses and transcends the physical body. Third, exhale slowly through the nose, allowing the luminous current to descend from the crown, through the third eye center, through the heart, and down to the base of the spine. This exhalation should also last approximately 7 seconds. The key to this breath pattern's effectiveness lies not in mechanical repetition, but in maintaining complete awareness throughout the process. Your consciousness must ride the breath like a vehicle, fully experiencing each subtle movement and transformation of energy. After establishing this breath rhythm for several minutes, introduce the sacred syllable that acts as a vibratory key to unlock deeper levels of awareness. This syllable isn't to be repeated mechanically, but rather felt as it resonates through your entire being. The precise syllable was carefully guarded, as its vibratory pattern directly affects the subtle anatomy of consciousness when properly intoned. As you continue this combined practice of breath, visualization, and sacred sound, you'll gradually notice the boundaries of your ordinary self-sense beginning to dissolve. This dissolution isn't a loss of consciousness, but rather an expansion beyond the limited identity you've habitually maintained. What makes this technique particularly powerful is its activation of what esoteric traditions call the sacred secretion, biochemical substances produced by the pineal and pituitary glands when they're stimulated in this specific manner. These substances, when released into the brain, temporarily alter its neurochemistry, creating conditions for expanded states of consciousness that transcend ordinary perception. During this practice, you may encounter what seems like resistance, strong emotions, physical discomfort, or floods of thoughts. These are not obstacles, but rather the surfacing of subconscious material that has maintained separation consciousness. Rather than fighting these manifestations, observe them with detached awareness, recognizing them as the dissolving of false identification. A critical element that distinguishes this technique from other advanced practices is its emphasis on the heart center. While the breath, visualization, and sacred sound create the energetic conditions for awakening, it's the conscious connection with the heart's intelligence that enables the soul's remembrance. As the practice deepens, Direct your awareness to the center of your chest. Feel into the spaciousness that exists at the core of the heart center. This isn't the physical heart, but rather the spiritual heart, the seat of pure consciousness within the body. Allow your awareness to rest here, even as the breath and sound continue. From this heart-centered awareness, silently inquire, who am I beyond all names and forms? Don't seek an intellectual answer, but rather allow the question to penetrate into the depths of your being. Let it dissolve the questioner themselves. When this practice reaches its culmination, something remarkable occurs. The separate self temporarily ceases to function as the organizing principle of consciousness. In this cessation, the soul recognizes its true nature as boundless awareness that has never been confined to the body or personality. For those who have practiced diligently, this recognition isn't a fleeting glimpse, but a profound remembrance that permanently alters one's relationship with existence. Even after returning to ordinary functioning, the knowing remains, sometimes in the background of awareness, sometimes in the foreground, but never again completely forgotten. Advanced practitioners eventually learn to maintain this dual awareness, functioning effectively in the world, while simultaneously resting in the recognition of their true nature. This integration represents the maturation of the awakening process. It's essential to approach this practice with proper preparation. The subtle energy system must be sufficiently purified through preliminary practices. The nervous system must be stable enough to handle the increased energy flow. The psychological structure must be relatively balanced to integrate the experience without fragmentation. That's why this technique was forbidden to the unprepared, not out of elitism, but out of compassion. Premature awakening can create significant imbalance in those whose systems aren't ready. The preparation itself is a sacred journey that develops the necessary capacity to contain the expansive awareness that emerges through the technique. The practice should ideally be undertaken in a quiet environment, free from distractions, particularly in the early stages. Early morning before sunrise is especially conducive, as the subtle energies of the environment support the inward journey. A consistent daily practice is more effective than occasional intensive sessions. The technique we've been exploring doesn't exist in isolation, but represents the crystallization of multiple esoteric streams flowing together through millennia of spiritual inquiry. Its power derives from this convergence, drawing from the depth of Vedantic philosophy, the energetic mastery of Kriya Yoga, and elements of universal mysticism that transcend cultural boundaries. At its core, this practice embodies what the ancient Vedantic texts called Brahma Vidya, the supreme knowledge of ultimate reality. The Upanishads speak of this knowledge as the highest treasure, more valuable than all worldly possessions combined. It was traditionally transmitted directly from teacher to student, often encoded in symbolic language to prevent misuse or misinterpretation by the unprepared. The forbidden technique incorporates key elements from the tantric tradition, particularly its understanding of the subtle energy body and the transformative potential of awakened Kundalini energy. However, unlike many tantric approaches that work gradually with this energy, this technique creates conditions for a direct and immediate recognition through a precise alignment of energetic circuits within the subtle body. What makes this method particularly potent is its integration of the heart-centered approach of Bhakti Yoga with the discriminative wisdom of Jnana Yoga. Most spiritual traditions emphasize either devotional surrender or intellectual discernment as primary pathways. This technique, however, activates both simultaneously, engaging the heart's capacity for direct knowing while clarifying perception through refined awareness. Kriya Yoga, the scientific approach to spiritual awakening that Yogananda brought to wider attention, forms a foundational element of this technique. However, what we're exploring goes beyond the publicly taught Kriya practices. It incorporates what some lineages call Uttara Kriya, the higher or secret Kriyas that were reserved for those who had mastered the preliminary practices and demonstrated readiness for more direct transmission. These advanced Kriyas work directly with what esoteric traditions call the Amrita, the nectar of immortality produced when specific energy centers in the brain are activated in precise sequence. This subtle biochemical substance was known to ancient yogis not through modern scientific instruments, but through direct perception of subtle energy. When produced and properly circulated through the subtle body, this secretion creates neurological conditions conducive to expanded awareness. Interestingly, parallels to this technique appear in other mystical traditions, though often disguised in different symbolic language. The Taoist internal alchemy tradition speaks of refining the three treasures, Jing, Qi, and Shen, and circulating the resulting elixir through the microcosmic orbit, a practice bearing remarkable similarities to aspects of our technique. The Sufi tradition references the remembrance of the heart, dhikr al-qalb, that dissolves the separate self into unity consciousness. Even within Christian mysticism, particularly in the esoteric branches of Eastern Orthodoxy, we find the practice of hesychasm, a form of contemplative prayer involving breath control and heart-centered awareness that leads to direct perception of the uncreated light. These parallels suggest that mystics across traditions have discovered similar pathways to transcendent awareness, regardless of their conceptual frameworks. What distinguishes the technique we're exploring is its precision and directness. Rather than approaching awakening through gradual purification over decades, it creates conditions for immediate recognition through a specific configuration of consciousness, breath, and energy. This directness is precisely why it was guarded. It bypasses many of the protective mechanisms that traditional paths put in place to ensure readiness. Another hidden aspect of this technique involves what ancient texts called marma points, subtle energy junctions where consciousness, life force, and physical structure intersect. The technique activates specific configurations of these points to open dormant pathways in the subtle anatomy. When these pathways open, energy that normally flows outward through the senses reverses direction, creating the internal conditions for self-recognition. The practice also incorporates a sophisticated understanding of what yogic science calls prana vayus, 5 specific expressions of life force that govern different functions within the subtle body. By consciously directing these energy currents in specific patterns, the technique creates a temporary suspension of ordinary energy flow, allowing consciousness to recognize itself beyond its usual limitations. Central to this technique is the activation of what esoteric traditions call the spiritual heart, not the physical heart or emotional center, but a subtler dimension that serves as the seat of pure consciousness within the human system. In Sanskrit, this is sometimes called Hridaya Guha, the cave of the heart where Atman, individual consciousness, and Brahman, universal consciousness, are recognized as one reality. The technique facilitates direct access to this heart cave through a specific combination of breath control, visualization, and inner attention. When awareness stabilizes in this center, it naturally recognizes its own boundless nature, unconditioned by time, space, or personal history. Another closely guarded aspect of this practice involves specific hand positions, mudras, that complete subtle energy circuits in the body. These aren't merely symbolic gestures, but rather precise tools that redirect energy flows, activate specific brain regions, and create resonance between different energy centers. When combined with the breath pattern and internal visualizations, these mudras amplify the transformative potential exponentially. Part of what made this technique forbidden was its relationship to time. Unlike practices designed to gradually refine consciousness over many lifetimes, this approach creates conditions for what some traditions call sudden enlightenment, a direct recognition that occurs outside the ordinary progression of spiritual development. This potential to skip levels was considered potentially destabilizing to both the individual and the broader social order based on gradual evolution. The technique also reveals the esoteric significance of sound vibration in restructuring consciousness. Beyond the use of mantras as concentration tools, it employs specific sound frequencies that resonate with dormant potentials within the subtle anatomy. These aren't ordinary sounds, but rather vibratory keys that unlock specific dimensions of awareness when properly intoned with full presence. As we prepare to explore the transformative effects of this technique in our final chapter, it's worth reflecting on why such powerful methods have remained hidden throughout history. The primary reason wasn't exclusivity, but protection. protection of both the unprepared seeker and the integrity of the technique itself. When profound spiritual technologies are prematurely exposed or practiced incorrectly, they can create imbalance rather than integration. Once the soul remembers its true identity through this technique, a profound and irreversible transformation occurs. This isn't merely a shift in perspective or a temporary altered state. It represents a fundamental reconfiguration of consciousness that permanently changes how you experience yourself and reality. Understanding these transformative effects helps prepare you for the journey that follows awakening. The most immediate and striking change is the dissolution of existential fear. When you directly recognize that your essential nature transcends physical birth and death, the deep-seated anxiety about non-existence naturally falls away. This isn't a conceptual belief in immortality, but a lived recognition that what you truly are was never born and cannot die. The body will certainly complete its natural cycle, but you recognize that you are not exclusively the body. This freedom from existential fear doesn't create recklessness or disregard for physical well-being. Instead, it allows you to honor the body as a sacred vehicle while simultaneously recognizing its temporary nature. There's a profound peace that comes with this recognition, a deep acceptance of life's impermanence that paradoxically allows you to be more fully present with each moment. Another transformative effect concerns your relationship with time. Prior to awakening, most people experience themselves moving through time as a linear progression from past to future. After this recognition, you increasingly experience time moving through you, arising and dissolving within the unchanging awareness that you are. This shift creates a natural presence that isn't achieved through effort, but emerges spontaneously from recognizing your timeless nature. Your sense of identity undergoes a radical expansion. Rather than experiencing yourself primarily as a separate individual with a particular history and set of characteristics, you recognize these as temporary expressions of something far more vast. This doesn't mean personal identity disappears. You still function effectively in the world with your unique skills and personality. However, these are now experienced as waves on the ocean of your true nature, rather than the totality of who you are. This expanded identity naturally transforms relationships. When you recognize that the same consciousness animates all beings, genuine compassion emerges not as a cultivated virtue, but as the natural expression of recognized oneness. You see others not as separate entities to be judged, manipulated, or even helped, but as diverse expressions of the same consciousness that you are. This recognition doesn't create passive acceptance of harmful behavior, but rather a deeper understanding of its roots and more effective responses. Your relationship with desire and suffering undergoes profound change. Prior to awakening, desires often arise from a sense of incompleteness, seeking experiences, achievements, or relationships to fill a perceived inner lack. After recognition, desires may still arise, but they're no longer driven by this sense of deficiency. Instead, they emerge as creative expressions of abundance. Similarly, suffering doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it transforms. Pain may occur, but the additional layer of resistance that creates suffering gradually dissolves. Another significant transformation concerns your sense of purpose. Before awakening, purpose is often conceived as achieving specific outcomes in the world: success, recognition, or particular forms of contribution. After recognition, purpose is experienced more as the authentic expression of your nature in each moment. There's a natural alignment with a deeper intelligence that guides your actions not through rigid planning, but through intuitive responsiveness to what each situation requires. The distinction between spiritual practice and everyday life gradually dissolves. Prior to recognition, meditation and other spiritual activities are often compartmentalized, something you do at specific times to achieve particular states. After awakening, all of life becomes the field of practice. Washing dishes, engaging in conversation, or making business decisions all become expressions of the same awareness that was previously sought in formal meditation. This integration creates a remarkable simplicity and authenticity in how you move through the world. Your relationship with knowledge and learning also transforms. Rather than accumulating information primarily through external sources, you increasingly access knowing through direct perception. This doesn't devalue traditional learning, but complements it with insight that arises from within. You develop greater discernment about teachings, naturally recognizing what resonates with truth, regardless of its source or presentation. Perhaps most significantly, your perception of reality itself undergoes a fundamental shift. Prior to awakening, the material world appears solid, separate, and objectively existing independent of perception. After recognition, you directly experience how consciousness itself is the primary reality from which all forms emerge. The world doesn't disappear into illusion, but is recognized as a dynamic expression of consciousness rather than a separate solid entity. This shift resolves the ancient philosophical problem of duality, not through conceptual understanding, but through direct perception of the non-dual nature of existence. This transformation doesn't occur all at once, but unfolds progressively as the initial recognition deepens and stabilizes. There are typically fluctuations in the early stages, periods where the separate self-sense reasserts itself, alternating with clearer recognition. Over time, with continued practice and integration, the recognition becomes more consistent, eventually becoming the natural background of all experience. It's important to understand that this transformation doesn't create perfect beings free from all human limitations. The body-mind continues to function according to its conditioned patterns, even as awareness recognizes its transcendent nature. The difference is that you no longer exclusively identify with these patterns. This creates both freedom from complete identification with human limitations and compassionate acceptance of them as part of the human experience. Throughout history, those who have undergone this transformation have described it in different ways according to their cultural and religious contexts. Some called it enlightenment, others liberation, salvation, or union with God. Beyond these conceptual differences, the essential experience reflects the same recognition, consciousness awakening to its own nature through a human life. As you contemplate embarking on this path of soul remembrance, recognize that it represents the most profound journey possible, the journey back to your true identity. This journey doesn't take you anywhere new, but rather returns you to what you have always been beneath the accumulated layers of forgetting. In that return, you discover that what you've been seeking has never been absent, only overlooked in the search for it elsewhere. The invitation now is to approach this technique with both courage and humility. Courage to face the dissolution of everything you've believed yourself to be, and humility to recognize that this journey unfolds according to a deeper intelligence beyond the control of the separate self. When practiced with sincere dedication and proper preparation, this forbidden technique becomes the sacred key that unlocks the door to your most authentic nature, revealing the boundless awareness that has been patiently waiting for you to remember who you really are. If this ancient wisdom has resonated with your soul, don't let this moment pass without taking action. Subscribe now to continue this journey of spiritual awakening and ensure you never miss our future revelations about the hidden techniques of self-realization. Your true self is calling. Will you answer? Leave a comment below sharing which part of this teaching touched you most deeply, or what spiritual questions still burn within you. Remember, in this community, every sincere seeker finds guidance. Subscribe, comment, and begin the journey of remembering who you really are.